Hi, I'm Adam Jennings, and this is Awaiting Approval, a podcast about the messy human side of creative leadership. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Frank, creative leader, former CD at Apple, ECD at LinkedIn, campaigns 40 over 40, and now author, for a relaxed two-way conversation about his journey, the lessons he's learned, and what it takes to lead with creativity and honesty. Kevin, hi, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I want to start this off really nice and light and easy, and for people to kind of get to know a little bit about you. So if we were doing this recording in person,
Yeah.
where would you take me and what would you order to drink?
um, well, I have the good fortune of living in Paris at the moment, and I'm surrounded by many, many cafes and bistros and stuff. So my favorite one, and they're not paying me to say this, um, is is a place called Cafe Murmure, which is basically in American or British English Cafe Murmur. And I'm not sure if it's named after it that because there's always a murmur of conversation there, or because a group of a particular kind of bird is called a murmur, and the cafe is decorated in a bird theme, also fish theme, but mostly bird theme thing. Anyway, it's a lovely spot. It's friendly. It's a good place for conversation. They have good coffee, so I could get us both caffeinated enough to make sure we say intelligent and exciting things.
Brilliant. Well, I will metaphorically raise a caffeinated drink to cheers and start this recording off. I'd love to know, keeping it light still, when was the last time you used pen and paper?
I still make handwritten to-do lists. And so, because I think there's great satisfaction in physically crossing something off of a to-do list as opposed to just sort of like tapping the delete button on my computer. So actually, the last time I used a pen and paper was earlier today, scratching something off of my to-do list.
Such a great feeling to just run that pen through that item
Yeah,
rather than,
yeah,
like you say, rather than tap it. There's something, um, the tactile gesture of that. It's a bit like trying to get all of the ideas out of your head when you're all in a bit of a muddle. To kind of get them all written down on paper or to say them out loud is something that's
yeah.
sort of freeing in a way that we don't have with text. So I get that completely.
Yeah, I think the physicality of it, both adds urgency to creating it and finality and a bit of a reward when you've completed the task.
So you're currently promoting your new book, which I'd love to hear more about. But first, can we go right back to where you started your career?
Sure. Okay, my first post-university pre-advertising job was I was actually a ski instructor in Colorado. I thought I was going to be pre-med, or sorry, I was pre-med in university, and I thought I was going to be a doctor, but I did all the organic chemistry and physics and biology and all this stuff. And then I got to graduation. I said, I need a little time off to think about what I want to do. And so I had the good fortune of being able to take a little time away before jumping into an office job. And I moved out to Colorado. I got a job as a ski instructor, and doing that, I really realized that I could get paid to do something that I really enjoyed doing, that I was passionate about. And I'm sure I would have been a fine doctor, but I know doctors now, and they really are passionate about what they do. So when I realized that medicine wasn't my actual passion, I said, well, what really is? And being creative, writing, entertaining people, like those are all things that I think are really in my nature and in my DNA. So my first advertising job, and I'm cutting off the 3 years in between, like when I decided I wanted to be a copywriter in advertising, and the pavement pounding and door knocking and all the other stuff that had to happen in between that before I was actually able to get my first job. My first job was at a small agency in Chicago, like very, very small. I'm not sure if they exist anymore. But yeah, it wasn't Wieden and Kennedy. It was the only place that would hire an untested junior copywriter. And this was, by the way, right at the time when the first crop of Portfolio Center graduates were coming out. So I had my little book with ideas scribbled in marker, and there's people coming out of Portfolio Center in Atlanta with beautifully polished, finished portfolios. And so those are obviously the people getting jobs at the great agencies. I took the job that was offered to me, and scratched my way up from there.
Love it. And I'd love to know, it kind of brings us nicely. I'd love to know a bullet point history of your career from that point to when you first got a CD role, and then from
Oh,
that role to where you are today.
yeah. So the bullet point version, although bullet points and PowerPoint in general scares me. Um, no, the bullet point version is so I followed a pretty straight path. I mean, there were ups and downs along the way, obviously, but the bullet point version is I went from junior copywriter to senior copywriter to ACD to CD to ECD. And again, that was over the course of 15 or 20 years. But yeah, I had my first job as a writer at this small agency in Chicago that I was talking about. Then I got a job after that at FCB in Chicago, so very, very big agency working on packaged goods. Then I moved to San Francisco and kind of worked at another small agency. They lost a bunch of clients and eventually shut down. So I freelanced for a little while. And then my first sort of big break was at Venables Bell and Partners. I'd been paying attention to what was going on in Adweek and Ad Age, and I'd made enough connections around San Francisco at that point to kind of hear what the buzz on the street was. So I heard that a couple of guys from Goodby, Paul Venables and Greg Bell, were starting an agency. And so I wrote a very sort of cheeky but honest letter to Paul, one of the founders, and I went over. Their office was actually down the street from me, and I knocked on the door, and I just had the good fortune of him answering the door. And I said, "Hey, Paul, I wrote you this letter," and he said, "Cool, who are you?" And then kind of just like slammed the door in my face. But he called me like an hour or two later and said, "Hey, I really like your letter. Let's talk." And so my first kind of big break job was as a senior copywriter at Venables Bell and Partners in San Francisco, and I was actually the first writer that they hired. After that, I went to a small agency called Booter Engel and Friends in San Francisco, and I worked there for about a year until again they kind of lost a big client and had to cut back. And then I freelanced for a few years, and that's when the Apple opportunity came along, and that was my first CD job. So I know you wanted bullet points, which I probably didn't do super well at, and you wanted me to stop at my first CD job, which I did remember to do. And then you can tell me where you'd like to go from here.
I love the the geographical moves in that as well. Like that's interesting to find. And was that geographical move brought around because of job situation, or was it something entirely different?
No, the geographical move was actually very, very personal. So, again, the first geographical move to Colorado was because that's where the good big mountains were. Chicago, I initially went to because of a girl, old story. But that was where I was when I got my first job. And after having been in Chicago, I think I lived there for about 4 years. It was a great town and a great place to be in my kind of mid to late 20s. But, ultimately, I think at that time it was an indoor town, and I'm an outdoor kind of person. And I know it's evolved since then. I mean, and I'm not doing Chicago justice because it's a great city. But the lifestyle that I wanted to live, being around mountains, being around the ocean, I think was better. San Francisco felt like a better fit for me. It just felt like home. And in fact, since moving to San Francisco, where I've been, outside of my last couple of years in Paris, I've been in San Francisco since the end of '99. I've really consciously decided to stay there. I think, if I had wanted to go run a big agency, if I'd wanted to pursue that move, New York would have been the obvious choice. And I grew up outside of Boston. My folks are from New York. I've spent time in New York. It wasn't, and it wasn't where I wanted to live. And so San Francisco, again, I think there are incredible creative opportunities there. There's a great creative community, but the decision to stay in San Francisco was not led by professional. It wasn't a professional decision. It was a personal decision.
I like, yes, the age-old story of copywriter meets girl, copywriter moves to city.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think is probably a running theme for a lot of guests that I'm going to have
Yeah.
on. So, first CD position at Apple, not a bad first CD gig.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I had during the intervening years between that last the shop where I had an ACD job and Apple, there were about 3 years in between, and I mostly freelanced over that time. Actually, I guess I exclusively freelanced over that time. And I'd freelanced for a mix of agencies directly and clients directly. Apple was one of those clients that had reached out to me fairly early on, in that period. And, they said, "Hey, how would you like to do a project for us?" And I said, "Sure." And then I guess I did an all right job at that project. So they said, "How would you like to do another project for us?" And I did. And so that actually went on. It was probably at least a year, possibly more, before they said, "Hey, you've been doing a pretty good job on these projects. We have this CD position opening up. Are you interested in that?" And the answer was a very resounding yes on my part. And it was interesting. It was a position as creative director of the retail organization, and what that means is if you go into an Apple store anywhere in the world, like you're going in to look at the iStuff, the iWatch and the iTV and the iPhone and the all their stuff, but you're actually surrounded by marketing. There's graphic panels on the walls. There's window displays. The people who work there are wearing T-shirts. There's signage on the tables. There's events. There's all that stuff. And I didn't know anything about it when they when they hired me. I didn't. Not only did I not know a whole lot about the Apple stores, I aside from a couple of retail clients, like there was this one. There's like a discount retailer in California that also no longer exists. I keep talking about a lot of businesses that don't exist anymore. It's not my fault. Anyway, they were, that was my retail experience. I had never done anything on the scale of Apple, obviously. And I said that to them. I said, I'm not a retail person. And they said, "That's okay. We like the way you think. We're trying to build up our conceptual muscle a bit. We think you'd be good for this job." So that was how I got from agency side to freelancing to Apple. It was just, over time, I did the best work I could for them as a freelancer and got their attention to talk to me as a full-time employee, as a creative director.
And I think that's quite when you talk with people like us who've been in the industry for a while. I think that's quite a well-trodden path. You get that little tiny project, a little door crack opening into a big brand like Apple. For me, it was 20th Century Fox, and it was just a tiny project to get done. And then you do a good job on that. And then maybe there's like a second tiny project, and you do a good job on that. And the trust in you from a big brand like that just sort of grows and grows. And then once you have trust from one big brand, and I don't know if you found this as well, like for me, once I had trust with Fox, then Paramount was much easier to knock on the door and say, "Hey, Fox has trusted me. How about you trust me?" And it sort of grows and grows. I guess it's part and parcel in a way of that age-old adage of it's who you know. It's sort of a connection / trust.
I mean, it's who you know, and also that philosophy of just kind of doing it one step at a time. There are a lot of adages about that. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The one that my personal favorite is, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." But there are all kinds of different approaches to that thinking, and that approach was not only how I built my freelance business and how I got into Apple, but really that philosophy is present in how I approach individual projects. It's how I approach leading teams. It's the advice that I have given to my teams in the past. But the idea that you don't do it all at once, you do it slowly over time, whatever that is, whether it's getting into Apple as a CD, whether it's getting into Fox, Paramount as your client, or whether it's learning a new skill, whether it's building a relationship with a new client or with a new agency. Like, I just think that idea is pervasive, certainly for me in my approach to my career.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's certainly true for I'm struggling to find a creative endeavor where that's not the case.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the first thing that came to mind was watercolor. There's so much experimentation when you're using watercolors, right from an initial, maybe a light sketch with a pencil to lay it out, to then a wash, to then the finer details. And you're constantly working with something that is to a degree predictable, but there are other elements that will factor in that you're just going to have to roll with. And so piece by piece is the way forward.
I love that. Are you a watercolor artist? This might be a thing I didn't know about you.
Artist is probably a very grand way of saying I like to play with watercolors. I don't get much of a chance anymore, but yeah, I love sketching in watercolors, and I find it incredibly relaxing to get out and just explore and play with that. And I think it's been really, really useful in more later years to move away from perfectionism, because sketching, I still beat myself up too much about, oh, that doesn't look exactly like it should look. And well, what is should look like?
Yeah, right. And what is perfection? Like what's sorry, I interrupted. Keep going. Keep rolling.
No, I agree completely. Like, who holds the true definition of when something is perfect? Like,
is it even possible? Does it exist?
Right, exactly. I mean, custard is the one thing that I think, no matter how you make it, no matter where it comes from, can be a definition of perfection. But that aside,
I love this. I'm going to say one more thing about custard, because who expected that you and I would be talking about custard over coffee? So this is completely unrelated and probably completely unhelpful to anybody listening, but I'm going to say it anyway. I had an employee, a team member at LinkedIn, who didn't like foods with like gooey consistencies. I don't know. I love that about him. I don't know why I'm saying it, other than like he didn't like custard. He didn't like flan. He didn't like rice pudding. He just didn't. I had this long conversation about it with him because I was so surprised. You can cut this out, by the way. This is, like I said, this is not helpful to anybody other than I'm just like looking back fondly on my conversation and bringing it full circle to say, like, for you, custard is perfect. Here's the business advice. Not only does perfection not exist, if it did, it would be different for every person. So for you, custard is perfection. For my former team member, custard is the Antichrist.
Right. I love that. And there you go. That is the social media clip that will promote this episode. Deep dive into the consistency of foodstuffs and whether or not someone has a preference.
I love it.
Hi. If what you're hearing is resonating with you where you are in your leadership journey right now, stay tuned until the end. I'll share details on how you can work directly with me to level up your creative leadership. You mentioned LinkedIn.
Yes.
Let's segue back into the design side of things. Yes. You mentioned LinkedIn. So keep that bullet point thing going from Apple to where you are now.
Well, so, when I joined Apple, I joined as a CD, and I thought, I was like, I'm going to join Apple and I'm going to tell them all about how to do great advertising, because that's why they're hiring me. And you can probably tell by my self-effacing tone of voice that was not actually the case. Turned out they knew a whole lot more about making great work than I did, and than I still do. But I did, over the almost, I guess, 8 years I was at Apple, I did learn an enormous amount about how to run a team, not just a strong brand, but one of the most valuable brands in the world looks like, what their approach to marketing is. I could spend this entire episode talking about all the stuff that I didn't know and that I learned there. So when I left Apple, I knew that I wanted to continue to lead teams because I really enjoyed that. I knew that I wanted to work on a brand that I really cared about and that I used, because that was one of the things that I got a lot of joy from at Apple. Like, I'm a Mac person. I've never owned a PC. I've never owned a smartphone aside from an iPhone. And by the way, Apple is not paying me to say any of these things. So just, I wasn't like a fanboy but I certainly was a fan of Apple, and I knew enough about brand building to say, I wanted to work on a brand and for a company who I think needed some guidance and help in that area. I did actually want to help build a brand, and so LinkedIn really ticked all of those boxes. It was a company that I was an early adopter of. I don't know if I was in the first when I first got there. They told me what member I was, and I don't remember if it was in the first million or not. But they've got over 1 billion people now, so I was a relatively early adopter and still am obviously a heavy user of LinkedIn. It was an opportunity to build a team from the ground up. It was an opportunity to take a brand that had a lot of awareness around it, at least in the United States, but people didn't really know what the brand stood for. So it was an opportunity to build a brand. And so when that role came up, that was the role I wanted. I'm like, yep, that's what I'm doing next.
And it makes perfect sense. Like a lot of people that I'm speaking with as I'm recording this first season, and I really feel this myself, they feel typically there's a position they've had or a company they've worked for where they suddenly feel like, yeah, I get this now. I
Yeah.
thought I understood, but now I really get this, or now I've found my community, or I've found my tribe,
Yeah.
and then going on after that, it's much clearer then what they want in their next role.
Yeah.
And it sounds like maybe that was similar for you.
Yeah, LinkedIn had all of those opportunities for me, and I feel really lucky that I had the opportunity to, and again, I don't want to claim credit for reinventing the brand all myself, because that's not true. There were a lot of people that were involved in it, but I feel it was an incredible experience to be part of the team that took the brand from, hey, people think about us as white collar workers in suits in office cubicles in a very transactional kind of company, to a company that was much more representative of the workforce, and that was a place where people felt they could be open and honest and help each other out, not just when they were looking for jobs, but if they needed work advice, if they needed, guidance, if they needed to learn something. I mean, you and I think initially connected on LinkedIn, and look where it's taken us.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love that aspect of it. We both talked about the importance of leaders mentoring team members and being there and helping those coming into the industry grow. And indeed those who have been in it for a while. Like we're all still learning, and we should all
Yeah.
still be open to that. And so I love that was a part of that journey for you. And that kind of brings me nicely onto the next thing I want to ask you, which is when you think about all of those places from that bullet point list, if you could pick one of those to go back to yourself at that time and that age, but knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself?
I would say focus on the relationships as much as you focus on the work, maybe more. So I would go back, I would go back to the agency side, Kevin, where I was all about just doing the best work I could. Sometimes doing that work was at the expense of coworkers' feelings, if I'm being honest. Sometimes it was at the expense of client relationships, although early on I wasn't really building client relationships like I did as on a senior level. I was just like, well, if I do great work, I'm going to be okay. And there is truth to that, and a lot of people go really far just doing great work. But what I've come to learn over the last several years is that the most important thing is relationships. Like the way you get to great work or the way you can get to great work without relationships, but I think you can get to even better work with relationships. So that's what I would tell young Kevin. I would say, invest the time in the relationships and treat people the way that you expect to be treated. That's gonna help you do even more of the work that you aspire to do.
I'm firmly aligned with that kind of human to human approach in leadership, and recognizing that everybody, those on your team, those in your management, those client side, they're all humans, right? And they all have the same or slightly similar goals and visions, and they all have good days and bad days. And when you start to realize that, you can then interact with those people on
Yeah.
a much more human level. And so that person who's usually quite jovial and jokey, if they're curt in their email or if they're quick in a meeting, then you get to understand, okay, well, maybe something's going on for them. It's not me. Our first reaction is often, what have I done? What did I say? What did I do
Yeah.
that's brought that about? When you realize, actually, it's probably not me. It's probably something that's going on for them. Maybe you can reach out. Maybe you can say, look, is there something going on? Can I help? And it just becomes a much stronger relationship, like you say. And then the end result of that stronger relationship, the collaboration, is usually much more fruitful.
Absolutely. But just to go back to what I was saying, like in a lot of cases, it was me. Like I wasn't, I could be kind of a jerk sometimes, and I could say like, well, sure, that's because I was 25 years old or 30 years old, and all like dudes in their 30s are kind of dumb jerks. But like that's that's an easy excuse, and I'm not much for making excuses anymore, even though I might have done so, when I was 30 years old. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think empathy and understanding that people have good days and bad days is really important. Like everybody's got their own stuff going on, but I'm putting it on myself and saying like, hey, I could have treated those people better, and that's what I would say to me is like, don't don't be a jerk all the time. And again, I wasn't like a jerk all the time, but I certainly could have invested a lot more time in relationships, getting to know people, getting to know clients' businesses, getting to be more empathetic to what was going on in their lives and the challenges that they were facing than I was.
That's a really candid answer. Thank you. And I
Yeah.
think it's going to help a lot of people to hear that candor, and to hear that sort of reflective look back over it. So thank you. Um, I'd love to know, to sort of balance that out, actually,
Yeah.
I'd love to know the piece of work you're most proud of.
Oh, choosing between my children. There's so many different ways to answer that. And it's a little bit of a okay. I think the thing that the piece of work, if one can define a team as a piece of work, that I'm most proud of is the team that I built at LinkedIn. One of the things I will define that as a piece of work because I'm talking and I'm just going to say that a team is a piece of work. And I don't mean it like a team's a piece of work. I mean, it is the work of being a creative director and being a leader, right? Like one of the things that I really have learned and have come to believe is that when you make that transition from creative to creative leader, your job is not doing the work anymore. It's creating an environment where your team can do the work and where your team can be successful. And so, the team that I created over the years at LinkedIn, yeah, I'm so proud of them and the work that they did, how they, I don't even know where to start with them. to build a high functioning team that respected each other and liked each other and did not just great work and great work for the brand, but work that really made a difference in LinkedIn members' lives. That's something that I'm really proud of, that I was able to create the environment, the team where those team members could be successful.
That's really powerful. And I think there's a really, do you think your answer to that would have been different when you were younger?
Oh, absolutely. What I was going to say is like when I was younger, and this is what I was saying, it's like when I started out, everything was about the work. So it didn't matter, the relationships didn't matter as much, the feelings didn't matter as much. What mattered was like doing great work and winning awards. And so I would be like, well, the thing I'm the most proud of is this printout or this TV spot or this thing that, won some shiny piece of metal. Because that's where my focus was. I didn't know any better. I had to learn that along the way. So yeah, my answer would have absolutely been different.
And it's interesting you say about learning that along the way. I'd love to flip, and I promise we'll flip back, but I'd love to flip from what you're most proud of to what what was the sort of biggest mistake, if you want to have a term, and what did you learn from that? Like we talked about the understanding the importance of having relationships, but was there a sort of singular point that you can think of where it's like, oh, okay, I see something differently here, or I see I should have gone a different path, or that kind of thing?
It was a conversation that I had with a coach that I was working with at Apple. And Apple was really good about giving their teams the opportunity, their leadership teams the opportunity to work with different coaches that they had. They actually had somebody who you could have who had office hours, which was great. I think coaching is super, super valuable. But this was an early session that I had with a coach at Apple. And it might have been the very first one. And she said to me, what's your job as a creative leader? What's your job as a creative director? And, my answer is like, I don't know, to do good work, to win awards. And she said, no, your job is to make your team more successful. So that's, that was, again, it's related to the other things that I was just talking about, work over relationships. But, I guess I could crystallize it in that one single answer of saying like, yeah, okay. Like it was like somebody flicked a light bulb on. I was like, oh, okay, I get that now. That was probably the highest level one. Another sort of aha moment, another sort of learning that I had was learning about culture, which I think was really important in my success at LinkedIn and at Apple as well. I think again, I'd worked at a lot of agencies. I'd worked agency side for most of my career, and worked at places where the doing great work was the culture in a lot of cases. And that's an overgeneralization. There's other pieces of culture, but the culture was in some cases centered around just doing the work. So I don't know if I actually knew what culture was. And pretty early on when I started at Apple, I was, kind of struggling at the beginning. And I remember this was like an early iPhone launch. It was, it was early enough that I could probably talk about it without Apple's lawyers like dropping out of the sky and saying you can't talk about that. It was like iPhone 3G or something, or whatever came after 3G, 3GS. Anyway, we've all seen like the beautiful hero images of Apple products up on billboards and stuff. And Apple puts an enormous amount of thought into picking that image, right? So when we picked a hero image for this phone, it was like a board full of like dozens, if not hundreds of images of like, here it is from the front, here it is from the back, here it is from the side, here it is from a little bit more from the side, here it is on this angle, like just looking at every single possible way to shoot this thing and talking about like the merits of each angle, right? Do you see more of the screen, or do you see the logo, or do you see the headphone jack, or do you see, how thin it is, how light it is, all that stuff. So I remember, we'd been talking about it probably for like at least an hour. And I thought, like, oh, I'm the creative director. Again, this is early on, and I really had no idea how to be a creative director. So I just sort of stepped in and said like, hey, can't we just pick one? Does this really matter? Because I was like, well, I'm going to move the conversation on. And it was like dead silence in the room, and everybody just stared at me like I had three heads. Like, what are you talking about? And then one person who'd been there for a while, said like, yeah, I mean, everything matters here. And that was so central to Apple's culture, was like sweating the details, making everything exactly perfect, thinking about things again and again and again. And when I realized that like, oh, okay, that's part of the culture here, and I started to take that approach to all of the work that I did and the way that I led my teams, I started to be a whole lot more successful. So I think, bringing it back to your question, one of the big mistakes I made early on at Apple for sure was just not understanding the culture, not respecting the culture. And then when I learned how to operate in the culture, I became a whole lot more successful.
That's a great point, and a great sort of mental image of that meeting and the aha moment within that as well. But then taking that within that wider context of understanding the culture and then fitting within that culture. And I think that's why it's so important. And often when I'm talking to people who are stuck in their career, one of the things I ask them to think about is, what's the kind of culture you want to work in?
Yeah.
Because many times when you feel stuck, it's not necessarily the work or the leadership or whatever it might be. It's just not the right place for them.
Yeah.
in terms of what's going on? It doesn't mean it's a toxic culture or a bad place. It's just it's not
Yeah.
the right fit.
Yeah, I think that's such good advice. I mean, we all, at least, in the advertising world, we all say like, oh, Wieden and Kennedy or Apple or Day or Mischief or, like, and these are all incredible places that make incredible work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best place for every single person to work. That culture, that fit is so important. And it's hard because it's so hard to define. Again, you can say, well, this is the kind of culture we have, but you never really know until you work a place that it's going to be a good fit or not. So, again, hopefully everybody's done their homework on both sides before you start working at a place. But even then, you don't know. And I think the ability to recognize that a place is not necessarily the right cultural fit, especially if it's a top tier place, I think takes a lot of presence of mind, a lot of maturity for somebody to say that and make those decisions. And I've known people like that who have gone on to do other things, and they're much happier, they're much more successful, and I really respect their ability to be that self-aware.
I promised you I would flip back
Okay, where are we flipping to
from
now?
going that way. So now I'd love to know, outside of work, what are you most proud of?
My daughter. She's she's really she's still a tween. She's 12, but yeah, she's just a great kid. Since we moved to Paris a couple of years ago, it's been incredible watching her grow. The French, particularly like education wise, like the French education system is kind of structured in a way that the Californian, San Franciscan one was not. Like where we were, it was a little bit more loosey goosey. Here it's like you have this color notebook for this subject and you have to be here and you gotta, your penmanship has to look this way. Like it's very, very structured, and she's really thriving in that. So seeing her thrive academically, seeing her learn an entirely new language. Like she didn't know any French when we moved here, and now, man, she's she can talk circles around me. Seeing her kind of come into her own has been really rewarding for me. So yeah, I'm really proud of what she's done.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Talking of children,
Yes,
a new book. You have a new book out.
I do have a new book. Is it plug time?
So it's plug time. Go for
All
it.
right. Do you want to ask? Do you want just to like say it's awesome, buy it, or if you have specific questions about it, I'm happy to answer.
I mean, I would love to know. I'd love to know. I mean, obviously, I know what it's about, but
Yeah.
explain a little bit what it's about. How did you get to it, and what are you hoping people get from it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you the story of sort of how it came into existence, and then what's in it. And what's in it, which should probably be no surprise, are a lot of the things we've been talking about over the course of the last hour or so. But the way it sort of came into being was, I left LinkedIn in the fall of 2022. And I just, after Apple and LinkedIn, again, like I'm really grateful I worked there. I got incredible experience, but I was tired. Those were big companies and big jobs. And I just decided I wasn't going to do anything for a few months, except, like surf, and the World Cup was going on at that point. So I watched like every World Cup match, and I took my daughter to school and stuff, but I wasn't going to do anything work-wise. But the head of a San Francisco agency had reached out to me and said like, hey, do you want to get lunch? And, like, sure, I like lunch. So I went and had lunch with him. And, one of the things he floated by me was to say like, hey, you've learned so much brand side about management and leadership. How would you feel about working with us in some capacity, to bring that to our agency? And had it been any other time in my career, I would have been like, oh my God, yes. Like, this is an agency and a person who I respect a lot. I would have been totally in, but I didn't. I tried to be honest and say like, I would love to do that, but I'm just not in the right headspace to do that right now. I just need this time away. And he said, oh, well, if you are not going to come work with us directly, you should write a book. You should write a book about how to lead creative teams. And I said, yeah, sure. I should totally do that. And didn't think about it for a few more months, but evidently like he had planted some little seed like back in the back of my head. And, there was like a little tap on the shoulder a few months later. And it's like, hey, Kevin, you should write that book. So I started, I did. So that's kind of how it came into being. Was I realized, again, I realized that what this agency leader had said to me was true. There was a need for it in the industry. I wish, I wish somebody had told me all of this stuff when I had my first CD job. Like I said, I messed up pretty egregiously, at least like the first several months to, year or so of my first CD job. I didn't know what I was doing. So yeah, I mean, I saw a need for it. It was something that I think I have been relatively good at. I've had some success at it, leading teams at Apple and LinkedIn. So I started writing to see what could happen. And so, yeah, I mean, what's in the book? A lot of the things that we've talked about, what it means to be a creative leader, which is at its core, like helping your people be more successful. It's not about doing the work yourself anymore. It's about creating that environment for other people to be successful doing the work. It's about building relationships in a large part through regular one-to-ones. It's about how to give creative feedback in a way that makes sense. It's about culture, which we just talked about, what culture is and how to build it. It's about being thankful and showing gratitude for your teams. It's about all that stuff.
What's the book called? Where can people buy the book?
Oh, what's the book? Yeah, right. That's right. We're in plug time. I guess I should probably officially plug it. The book is called Raising Creative Teams. And the full title is Raising Creative Teams, Practical Leadership for an Emotional Business. You can find it at Amazon. You can get it directly from the publisher, Springer Nature. If you prefer to go more local, you can get it at bookshop.org. You can find it. When I was a kid, there used to be commercials for albums, and they'd be like, buy them at Sam Goody and wherever fine records and tapes are sold. So yes, you can find Raising Creative Teams anywhere fine records and tapes are sold.
Kevin, I've got one last question for you. It's the same question that I ask every guest at the end of every episode. Are you, Kevin Frank, still awaiting approval?
Yes. Yeah, I think, I got into this business because I love being a creative and I love creating work. But there's always a part of me that says like, yeah, I want my creative directors, I want the industry, I want people who see my work out in the world to say, hey, Kevin, good job. And similarly, now we're just talking about the book. And I wrote the book because I genuinely want the work to get better. And I genuinely want people in the industry to be better managers and leaders. But I wouldn't be being honest if I didn't say like, yeah, of course, there's a little piece of me that wants the industry to say, good job, Kevin. You did something good. So yes, I'm still awaiting approval.
Thank you for the candid answer. Last final thing for people get in touch with you if they want to reach out.
Oh, let's see. Is there a social network, a professional social network that I worked for that you and I met each other on? Yeah, no, of course. Probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm on it pretty constantly.
Fantastic. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Really, real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam. It's been a great conversation, and I hope we are both adequately caffeinated after our imaginary coffee shop visit.
Thanks for listening to Awaiting Approval. If you're a creative leader or stepping into a leadership position and want support that's honest, practical, and tailored to you, I'd love for you to come and join my Supercharged Creative Leaders Program. It's a 4-week course built around 8 pre-recorded modules, 4 live sessions with me and the rest of your cohort, a private Slack space for you to ask questions and go deeper together, plus ongoing access to my alumni community once you complete the course. Each cohort is capped at just 6 people, so you'll always get personal attention, real feedback, and space to grow. And if you want to tailor the journey further, you can book extra one-to-one sessions with me, and we can dig deeper into the challenges you're facing right now. I built this program based on everything I wish I'd known when I started leading creative teams. No fluff, no jargon, just the tools, frameworks, conversation, and clarity that will actually move you forward. Spots go quickly, so if this sounds like the right fit for you, go to growwithadamjennings.com to book your place on the next cohort. Previous attendees have gone on to win major pitches, land new roles, get promoted, and step into leadership with more clarity, confidence, and purpose. You can find out more and book your place on the next cohort at growwithadamjennings.com. I can't wait to start working with you.